So I've been asked to say a few words about the next few years in Europe. What can we expect? I mean, we've heard about the future. We've held suppositions that maybe government is going out of business from the previous speaker. I think what's going to happen in Europe is that our democracy will reclaim its space in the technological world, that we will try to put citizens back in control of some of these processes that we've heard so eloquently about in the past 2 hours. And it's an exciting period, I have to say. I mean, technology has not been anchored more strongly at the heart of the European Commission than it is in the forthcoming one headed by Ursula von der Leyen. I remember when President Obama's chief of staff was once asked, what was the most important thing during the presidency? And I thought he would say Russia, Syria, I mean, so many issues, China. And he said technology adoption, technology procurement. This was, for the 2 terms of the Obama presidency, the most important thing. Well, I'm glad to say that it looks like we will be able to say the same about Europe in the forthcoming period. And let me say a few words about the philosophy behind it. So I felt quite overwhelmed in the morning hearing about the future technological developments. But I think what we will try to do in the future is also to move from this digital everywhere paradigm of chasing an ever more distant goal to more of doing technology by design, technology that serves a purpose. And I will add right away that this obviously cannot come at the expense of value creation. We need to do both at the same time. That is clear. But I mean, digital is everywhere. There are some who argue that we are entering a post-digital world because startups, modern startups, if they want to have an edge, they have to be digital. So something else needs to differentiate them. It's the customer experience most often, most of the times. And we will be in this hyper-digital technological race that will affect the way we live, the way we identify ourselves. I mean, what's going to happen in our homes, I think, is probably as close as it gets to our individual experience. But the differentiating feature, to my mind, which will be of defining nature, is customization. It's the fact that we will zoom in more at the needs of individual citizen. And this means a huge challenge for public policy. I like very much the study which the Harvard economist Raj Chetty and his colleagues have done about opportunity in the United States, because they looked at a granular picture of social mobility across the country, and they identified the correlations which should guide policy. So what they, for example, have come up with is that if you prop up social housing vouchers, which are offered in the United States for people to move from one neighborhood to next, so that this enhances their social mobility. If you prop it up by a relatively inexpensive instrument of individual assistance, of a helping hand, telling people better what to do with the money, the results are exponentially better. So the cost of that intervention is 1 to 1.5%. It is highly customized because you really zoom in at the individual. You don't just hand out money to people. You look at what their needs. You look at what they ought to spend on. And this creates enormously better outcomes. In Europe, the Novoville platform for governments, which is now active in about 40 cities, has also achieved wonders in addressing citizen needs. In Athens alone, 22,000 requests have been handled in the first period, and the efficiency of local government has risen by 25%. I think that's the type of paradigm which we will see more of in the future. Now, one could get somewhat depressed sometimes about Europe's prospects, hearing about the cutting-edge technologies, about the platforms. We saw the graph with the big platforms where Europe is, well, it's relatively small in the game. Well, I think that's not telling the whole picture. And it's worth looking at what's happening in the fintech world right now, in the banking industry. And there is a genuine revolution taking place. I mean, the saying in the financial services industry is invest in tech or die. And people are investing in tech because they don't want to die. There are highly innovative European fintechs, such as the Swedish Klarna, such as the German N26, which have global expansion plans. And guess what? I mean, the reason why they are so successful is because of the European single market and because of the financial passporting arrangement which exists in Europe, meaning that if you have a banking license in one member state, you can use that license elsewhere for your expansion across the EU. That's not something that they would have been able to do in the United States, where you would have to shop for a banking license going from one state to the other. So we have, I think we should learn from the areas where we perform well and draw our conclusions for the broader picture. But looking at the entire economy, a lot of the internet success stories associated with the consumer world. I think we are moving in terms of value creation into a more balanced picture in which enterprise and public sectors are at least as important. And this graph shows augmented reality and VR applications. And you see that it's more or less half-half in terms of the future value creation between consumer and between public and enterprise and public. Europe's strong advantage surely lies in our manufacturing power, in our manufacturing experience. It's what you see on the right-hand side. It's our comparative advantage calculated by Fraunhofer. So advanced manufacturing technologies, Internet of Things, also space. I mean, this is the progression. This is what the evolution of our comparative advantage. So we also see that in a lot of areas, we are at risk of losing out. But certainly this is the T in IoT is our strength. But we obviously need to make the I as important and as powerful as the T. And we have to say, I mean, we're doing pretty well. Here you can see the machine-to-machine SIM card penetration, one of the important indicators of an IoT ecosystems. And European countries are doing fairly well, but the USA is also doing very well. It's actually leading in this particular area. So we have to be aware of that. Now, when it comes to technological developments, and we have heard so much about it this morning, I think what really matters is the convergence of technologies. I mean, for public policy, this is hyper important. Why? Because we need to avoid compartmentalization. We need to encourage horizontal processes in spending programs, such as Horizon Europe, for example, with the new mission-based approach. We need to make sure that we adopt this interdisciplinary, horizontal, cross-cutting approach because the technologies converge. So when it comes to precision agriculture, when it comes to gene-based predictive medicine, or when it comes to managing supply chains, this is really what makes the difference. Yes, automation is progressing. We are somehow dormant about it because our unemployment figures are low across Europe because employment is being created. So we tend to assume that what worked after the Industrial Revolution started works also now, that new jobs are being created. And that's true, but the scale of automation is progressing, and it's also affecting the jobs that perhaps wouldn't be obvious candidates for the list, meaning management jobs, jobs that involve reasoning and decision-making. They are top of the scale here. What's very clear about the future value creation is that it's going to happen where the cognitive dimension enters the equation, meaning where the human creativity is added. And this is what we should definitely focus on. The last presentation was about artificial intelligence. Well, so it happens that we have we have a promise by the new president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, that she will put forward in the first 100 days a coordinated European framework for ethical and human implementation of AI. And there are people literally at this time putting things on paper. Well, we know what we need to do for human-centric AI. We have the guidelines that have been produced by the high-level expert group. They have to do with accountability, they have to do with transparency, explainability, the human agency and all that. Well, the challenge is how to implement it. I mean, what type of a system to build in the future, because you cannot regulate for every single contextual use of artificial intelligence. That would be nonsense. So you need a more flexible system that will probably be paralleled after the food safety system in the European Union, where, yes, there are certain norms, but there is also a rather flexible system of checks, allowing for people to go ahead with production, but under a watchful eye of a certain degree of monitoring. So a similar type of approach will be necessary. For public sector, more will be needed. I think impact assessment of algorithms that are used in the public sector will be essential in order to inspire people's trust. Our particular problem with the technology that we're talking about is its high concentration, and has to do with network effects. And we have tried to reform the European competition policy in order for it to be sufficiently agile. It has been difficult because the goal is ever more quickly escaping. And there are new concepts in the debate. There is a very interesting concept put forward by high-level expert group advising the new executive vice president Vestager about the mandatory data sharing. So a concept which goes to the heart of the model that has been used by the big technological giants, putting forward the proposition that, well, why should only a handful of big firms be able to monetize data that belongs to people? And I think that direction of travel is very promising and will be certainly pursued in the future, of mandatory data sharing. Now, cybersecurity is a huge headache, and we are investing heavily across Europe in our resilience. But what one should also add is that cybersecurity creates also an opportunity for new businesses to be created. I mean, just one example is the shift from cloud to edge computing, which aims to limit the type of exposure which comes with being present on the cloud. So yes, resilience comes first, and this will require massive efforts also at the European level through the ENISA agency. Then we will come to protect European critical infrastructure in a much more serious fashion, but we will also see more technological developments that take cybersecurity into account. We are exposed to what is now a geopolitical struggle around technology, and we need to become aware of the highest risks which we can incur to our values. I think this graph showing the surveillance technology as it's being developed and and the space which China occupies in that particular race, I think gives everyone food for thought. So our response has primarily relied on the notion of strategic autonomy, and it has 3 dimensions. It's a project which I think will be a defining one for at least a decade to come in Europe, because frankly we have become too exposed. We have let ourselves be convinced that we should not stifle innovation by regulating too heavily, but this is going to change. This will need to change also when it comes to strategic autonomy. So there are 3 dimensions. There is the political dimension, which has to do with the integrity of our democracies, operational, which has to do with critical infrastructure, but also industrial. I mean, we are dependent on a number of raw materials, cobalt and others. We can try to replace them. We can try to innovate in order to find something new. That is really important. We also need to keep an eye on the ball as it moves around. So future capabilities. Quantum computing will render encryption as it exists today void. So we need to develop, and we are a little bit late in that race, we need to develop encryption which will be usable for the world of quantum computing. Of course, we have made a big bet in Europe on privacy, and that's the bet we will maintain. I have no doubt about it, and I think that's the right bet to make. Also, when you look around, this is The Economist writing about China a couple of days ago. Of course, I mean, one shouldn't get too excited about Chinese sensitivity to privacy. It is a different culture. Customer experience in business means much more than it does in our part of the world. But nevertheless, I think privacy will be enormously important, and we have set up the gold standard. The question is now, again, how to make it work in practice. The GDPR regulation, which concerns privacy, is there. This is the gold standard, but our data protection authorities have been swamped with data breach notifications. There are literally tens of thousands of them being filed. So we need a system which is more agile, which is able to influence the market better. Perhaps a privacy rating scheme of the different services would make sense, where the relevant authorities would be able to say what are the privacy measurements applied by a given service provider. 2 main messages for the end. We are moving from digital as an end to digital as a means. And I'll use the example of digitalization of the economy here, because I mean, we're not doing particularly great when it comes to digitalization of some sectors. I mean, look at utility, about 2/3 across this ranking, with electricity, gas, water, waste, or motor vehicles, just over 10% in our digital transformation scoreboard. That's not exactly where we want to be. So this has been achieved by the paradigm of digital as an end. We need to move towards a paradigm of digital as a means, meaning that digital has to enable something, in this case, the rise of productivity that our economy desperately needs. Technology will also be part of the solution to carbon neutrality, no question about it. I mean, this is a particular game changer with respect to the energy system, where the combination of connectivity, electrification, and decentralization will create an altogether new system where carbon neutrality will be much easier. AI, that we've talked about, also has a huge potential when it comes to optimization. I don't think AI by itself can be a game changer in achieving carbon neutrality, but it can really help with respect to optimizing our approaches, our policies. And there is a group of researchers that created this climate change AI network, and they have put forward a number of very powerful arguments, including how AI can help to shape demand for electricity, how it can help us to manage the efficiency of buildings, or how it can optimize supply chains. And my final message this morning will have to do with this combination of economic value and normative value, because I think the solution to that particular puzzle lies at the heart of reinserting democratic and citizen control of the technological revolution. I think Shoshana Zuboff has put it best throughout her book, in fact. I think it's full of reflections of very profound nature, namely that democracy has slept while surveillance capitalists amassed unprecedented concentrations of knowledge and power. I think that is a message we need to take very strongly to our hearts. And just 3 examples of how we can do things differently. So the way we can do things differently is by privacy by design approach, where we assume from the very beginning that everything that happens to our data will be in full respect of our privacy concerns and the respective regulations, because the regulations are not a product of the technocratic world, they are a product of democracy. That's how we should look at them. So there is that French voice recognition software called Snips, which provides a good example of how you can build privacy into the design right from the start. Namely, the voice doesn't leave the device. And they have proven that in order to improve the product itself, you don't need to transfer the data, in this case, the voice. You can really do it on the device. The other area, which will, I think, see an exponential rise, in which we have to take very seriously in Europe, is data sharing. So we have created now this platform on rare diseases registration that has recently been launched, that groups a number of member states, almost all, in order to create a coordinated way of accessing database on rare diseases. It's not easy because there are no national registrars of these data. The data resides in the respective hospitals, but we need to put that together if we want to achieve medical results. And the final example is that of data commons. Decode is a project tested in Barcelona and Amsterdam, where you attempt to create citizen-friendly value added from the data that citizens provide. And it has to do with everything that you need in order to function properly in the city. So my message and my reflection about the forthcoming period is that we should not try to imitate others. We should not try to imitate at any cost the US in its model or China in its model. We should try to identify our own assets and make the best out of them, also putting democracy back at the center of the equation. So if there is a band at the beginning of the next Estonian Digital Agenda Conference, I would wish that it plays Frank Sinatra's My Way, because Europe's third way, a more human-centric approach to technology, in my mind, has a huge future in front of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paweł, don't leave quite yet. I really hope that it's not My Way, because the song starts like, and now the end is near. So let's hope that.
Well, I mean, depending how you look at it.
Anyhow, in your presentation, you talked about like the massive digitalization and within the digitalization, the need for customization. And we talked a bit, or you gave a few examples of how that has happened within the governments. Now, with our working with our digital agenda, we of course would like to know what is the baseline of really getting this going on the massive scale, how to get governments to customize for the citizens. What's your take on this?
I think it's really the power of example, because you cannot preordain governments across Europe to do this. But by showing the results and by showing leadership, you can start something which can then grow bigger. I think at the European level, if that was to be done better at the level of the European Commission, European Parliament, it's difficult because it's 500 million people at the moment, a little bit less after Brexit, but still, of course, a huge operation. So how exactly do you customize? I think we need to be more granular in our policy because problems are different. You cannot have the same solution for everybody. We have tried to do that with, for example, carbon-intensive regions. So there is a separate program, and that I would describe as an example of customization. For specific problems, you have a specific solution. So carbon-intensive regions have a specific type of solution for them. And that's, to my mind, the direction of travel, to be more granular, to look at problems the way they are, because sometimes cities differ even if they are not very distant to each other. So application in practice and the power of example, the power of leadership, I think that's the best way rather than trying to impose anything from the skies.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.